God bless. This is NFL Moneyball, brought to you by NFL Extended Strategic Principles, found on the web at nfl-esp.com. I am your host, Mark Anthony DeBello. For more information on me and this program and the NFL ESP system, you can go to my website at markanthonydebello.com and click on the Sports tab. Today is Monday, November the 16th. We're in Week 11 of the NFL season. Week 10 just wrapped up with the Houston victory over Cincinnati. This program is going to be a half hour long, primarily divided up into 3 segments, covering the games from the perspective of NFL ESP, or Extended Strategic Principles, then how it relates to those who might have an interest in Nevada, and then lastly to those who have an interest in fantasy football. Again, NFL ESP covers the games from 4 unique perspectives: the spiritual, the motivational, X's and O's, which is typically play design, and then lastly the strategic, which incorporates our unique and exclusive use of a number we call the power spread. And then that number is used or designed for coaches to use to make the most probable and productive basic strategy decisions. Again, we focus on the 3 P's in that area: the prophetic, the predictive, and the productive. As I mentioned, the second phase of the program, how things relate, how this number and this information and this system relates to Nevada, surely helps with the predictive. But again, we don't believe people need to be investing in games. We believe in the integrity of the games, but it's not to say that the number, the power spread, shouldn't be used, because it's undervalued and misunderstood as it relates to coaches making the most probable and productive basic strategy decisions. And as you've heard me repeatedly say, the number has been proven and guaranteed to increase a team's win production by at least 10 to 15% in the NFL. That's 2 to 3 wins per regular season, and even more so in college. That's the minimum. And that covers college basketball, college football, and then in the pros, basketball, football, baseball, and even hockey. Lastly, this information is very informative and insightful when it comes to those who are interested in fantasy football. That's already been proven, and we're going to continue to elaborate and expound and expand upon that, because I know many people have an interest in fantasy football. It's been endorsed by the NFL, even though we believe it does have much to do with the B and the G word, which also relates to Nevada and words we don't use, because again, and I say this wholeheartedly, we believe in the integrity of the game, and the greatest statisticians next to God above, who uses math as a language, come out of Nevada. However, when they disseminate their version of a number they call the spread, it's been skewed 2 or 3 times over, so that those who play the games end up losing to the house or to the quote-unquote book. So they're not going to give you, and you can see that this week with so many quote-unquote underdogs who won straight up or outright, many of which we predicted, and we'll go over Week 10 here briefly, that number isn't always the most accurate number. Again, it's been skewed a few times over. First, it's skewed when it's first disseminated by those in Las Vegas. They gear up for you to invest in the wrong side. They know who you're going to play, the more popular teams, the ones that seem most likely like they should win. And then that number changes throughout the week as the media influences it, typically in the wrong direction, meaning they pick inaccurately. And then the number is also a barometer as to who the public invests in. And again, they're guided by either home favoritism or popularity or the media or their own inaccuracy or ineptness. And then the number is skewed even more, and it's just basically a barometer, an indicator of how much greater a team is liked or favored above another team. It's not actually necessarily the statistically accurate accurate number. So having said that, we're 5 minutes into the program. I've made some notes regarding last week. We also like to cover some cultural matters in the NFL and pro sports leagues, and perhaps sometimes with what's going on in the world from a spiritual, again, a godly perspective, oftentimes very unique compared to what most people are saying and what you're hearing. But again, we really pride ourselves in a positive sense. I do especially on communicating with the Lord God, the only one true God, the Christian God above, and then relaying that information to you with the hopes that it even helps you be productive in your life when it comes to being prophetic, predictive, and productive. So let me go over a few notes that I made here, again, and go over the results from last week. I wanted to make a note about some of the games, and you'll get some of the results here. And I guess I'll just make the notes on some of these players and then go through the teams. So the first note was on Sam Bradford. As you heard me say at the beginning of the year, we predicted the Eagles to get about 5 wins. We figured Bradford would get hurt at some point during the season. He did. I hate to see any player get hurt. I hate to have that prediction or that prophecy become accurate. But as one of the lower-rated starting quarterbacks, if not the lowest-rated ones, as we also believe Nick Foles is, and now he's not even in the starting lineup. And I mentioned this when they made the trade, the Eagles and the Rams, at the beginning of the year. Actually, I think you'll see the Eagles do a little bit better with Sanchez in there when most people are thinking they're going to do worse. But I think Sanchez is actually rated a little bit higher than Bradford. But this, again, will go to lend to the Eagles' very poor season and how they're continuing to have a poor season. And I think you're going to see actually the Rams perform a little bit better with Case Keenum in there, because I actually like Case Keenum. I've seen him play. I rated him when he was with Houston. And I think he's going to help the Rams perform a little bit better than Nick Foles. Another quarterback note I actually have here is Big Ben. That's Ben Roethlisberger. The Steelers, we actually liked Johnny Manziel and the Browns last week a little bit to upset Pittsburgh, presuming Landry Jones would start, which he did. But when Landry Jones went down, which is unexpected, you can hardly, predict an injury like his. Big Ben came in and rallied the Steelers, and the Steelers are a much, much better team with Roethlisberger at quarterback than any other quarterback. He's one of our higher-rated quarterbacks, and that showed, and especially showed in the fantasy numbers with guys like who we liked the week before, Antonio Brown. We didn't actually play any Steelers this week thinking Jones would be in there. The game was low scoring until Roethlisberger got in there. Manziel did perform actually pretty well for Cleveland. And then here's another note, relates to fantasy actually. I heard Matthew Berry, who is a quote-unquote, I can't even say the word when it comes to his name. I mean, I God bless him for having a job at ESPN. He was doing fantasy football, I guess, giving his opinion loudly, enough that people thought he was a quote-unquote word that begins with an E, ends in a T, X, okay, I don't want to say any more, but he is often very inaccurate. I mean, I don't know how he is considered, gets the platform he gets, but he said his top-rated fantasy player of the week was D'Angelo Williams of Pittsburgh, and I think he had negative rushing yardage. And I knew that as soon as he predicted he was going to predict. I mean, just like the public, they see a guy have a good week one week, they figure he's going to have a good week the next week, and then the second thing he does is he knew Cleveland had a poor defense statistically in rankings, not the way NFL ESP ranks with the power ranking, but in their own sort of ranking and total yardage and your typical 1 through 32 ranks in the NFL. And then, sure enough, just like a normal person or a less accurate person, ungodly person would do, he predicted D'Angelo Williams would have a huge day in fantasy, and he actually had a very poor day, which to me was not surprising. So anyway, having said that, a couple of the other notes I have here about things in the media which are disturbing to me. I actually saw a Campbell Soup ad. You heard me last year mention about this Ford ad where this Mr. Ford guy or Ford Mr. Country comes out and he says the person can marry whoever they want, and it's some, I don't know, homosexual-looking preacher marrying a guy to his male car. I mean, there's a lot of homosexual ungodly, satanic influences there. And in this Campbell Soup commercial, I actually saw two men talking to a little child about which soup was better or something, which flavor Campbell Soup was better, and he said, much like I guess they were mocking or imitating Darth Vader, he said, "I am your father," and then the other one said, "I am your father." No, children have one father. First they have Father God, then they have Adam, then they have Jesus Christ if they choose to accept him, then they have their earthly father. And prayerfully, an earthly God-given mother in a heterosexual relationship, man and to a woman, married, not lesbian or homosexual or gay. It's just ungodly, and it's a travesty, and it's satanic, and it's just disturbing to see this Campbell Soup ad, which I saw during, I think, an ESPN, who's, I don't want to say much more about ESPN. I've worked with Disney in the past, and they have a quote-unquote rumored, well, it's not quote-unquote rumored. There's rumors about how Disney operates, but still I would love to work for ESPN. I give them all the respect in the world for a show that was on last week, The Gospel According to Coach Mack, or The Gospel According to Mack, as part of their ESPN 30 for 30 series. I just have to comment. I wrote it down in social media at a few places. It's the greatest show I've ever seen on ESPN. I've been watching ESPN probably as long as they've been on. I don't know how long they've been on, but I've been watching at least since I was 8 years old. So if they've been on 45 years, I've been watching them. So to their credit, ESPN put this very Christian show, very well done, ESPN 30 for 30 on Coach Mack. I encourage everybody. I actually sent some information to certain teams, the coaches who I work with and I know, to try to get them closer to God. I mean, it's just an amazing, amazing show. So I do give ESPN, credit for that. So having said that, some of the other social notes I have here, I already kind of briefly mentioned Nick Foles. He's now out for Case Keenum, and I'll get to the prognostications of the games from an ESP perspective when we get to the Rams game, but I think that's a bit of an upgrade actually for the Rams. So I have a note here, and I can't actually read it on my own. You believe that? I see, 10 of 781. I heard on the ESPN game tonight, which is part of what I espoused the NFL ESP system for, is that of the 781 games, I guess, there's been on Monday Night Football in the lifetime of Monday Night Football, which I think is something like 30 or 35 years or so, they've only had 10 teams that by this length in the season, this deep in, week 8 or week 9 or week 10, well, week 10 actually, but played 8 or 9 games, that only 10 of the 781 there was an undefeated team featured. Typically you probably want to have all the undefeated teams on Monday Night Football to, increase the ratings, at least certainly the best matchups. And part of what NFL ESP can do, because we have a word I love to use, which is vision, but we can tell, and we also factor in other things like pop culture and the popularity of teams and the size of the media markets and other, factors of going on in the news, where there are players breaking records or things in, in life that have, where these gladiators of the gridiron and the National Football League has a real cultural influence or a societal influence. You want the best, closest, most impactful matchups. I mean, fortunately, they had a good matchup tonight, Cincinnati and Houston, even though, they did have Cincinnati was undefeated, but they were double-digit power spread favorites over Houston, and amazingly, Houston upset them in a game that really came down to a fourth-quarter drive, and that's what you want. You want a close game that comes down to a fourth-quarter drive. But to hear that they've only had 10 of 781 is I think, being unproductive, and I think that, if NFL ESP were involved, we would give you the best matchups through 16 weeks or 17 weeks of Monday Night Football, and that's one of the attributes of NFL ESP, that we can do that, and one of the great qualities, and surely that can, is a great value when it comes to increasing viewership, because as I mentioned, part of what I would love to do, or at least part of this, if we don't do a video tutorial, is to widen the range or the viewership or listenership of NFL ESP or NFL Moneyball. And I know I'm confusing my language a little bit. I'm fatigued. It's it's a little bit late in the evening, and I do get a little dyslexic sometimes, so, but I try not to when it comes to numbers and, certain accuracies of and information that I relay with regards to NFL ESP. So we're about halfway through the program, so let's go over last week and get right into this week. Last week we projected the Lions over the Packers, surprising big, power spread underdogs, and they ended up winning. Surely they weren't 10 or 11 points as Las Vegas had them. And we knew Green Bay was suffering some injuries and they were going to be getting weak, and they did. Again, I still think you'll see the same thing with the Patriots, and I'll get to their game later. Tampa, Dallas, we figured it was a coin toss. We leaned toward Tampa. That was correct. Carolina, Tennessee, I actually thought Tennessee would do better. I give Carolina all the credit in the world. Tennessee did fight very hard, played the game a lot closer than the score would indicate. I don't think they made enough key basic strategy decisions. They weren't, word we love to use, aggressive enough. So Carolina ended up winning that game. Chicago, St. Louis, honestly, I didn't see this one coming. I really thought St. Louis would win this game. Now I can see the coaches must see a lot of what I see by taking Foles out and making a change there at quarterback, because that's really where they're not producing. They are at running back. Gurley's noted doing well. The Bears actually are doing much better than I thought, and apparently Coach Fox, or at least the coaching staff, the GM there, has made a big difference, which I knew after the Bears didn't take us on last year with my old college coach, Coach Tressman. I met Mr. Emery. I was totally disrespected by their analytics person named Mitch Tanny. He just really threw me under the bus. He took what information he could. He used it to make a key decision in the Green Bay game that Coach Tressman gave all the credit to Mitch Tanny, his analytics person, when I had taught this kid, Mitch, what to do. And then, I stopped and said, forget this, I'm not giving this information any more freely to them. And then the Bears went downhill after that, and I'm not surprised. He wasn't getting my insights and the NFL ESP information and data, and now none of them are with the Bears. And look how much better the Bears are doing this year. And they're not that good a team. Believe me, they're getting coached up, as it were, quote unquote coached up, and must have some inspiration of being. And I think the general manager there must have made a huge difference, because I don't even think Mr. Emery's in football anymore. And I know Coach Tressman's now with the Ravens, and as much as I love Coach, he kind of, in a way, disrespected me and misused me, and now they're not doing well with the Ravens, and I begged the Ravens to work with them all season long. So anyway, having said that, Saints in Washington, as I mentioned, these are the two weakest divisions in the NFL, so not surprisingly, it was a high-scoring game, and not surprisingly, the Redskins won. I thought that the Saints would win, but I'm not surprised. Again, we had that game as a toss-up. Every game with those divisions compete against each other this season will be like that. So next game, Browns and Steelers. I already spoke a little bit about this game. I think it would have been a lot closer. I thought Johnny Manziel played quite well. I do think he has to take the handcuffs off and be still even more of the way he was as Johnny Football at Texas A&M, and just improv so much more than he is. But again, that injury and Roethlisberger coming in really is going to make the Steelers strong. And again, I have them noted down as probably a playoff team, wild card there by the end of the year, since they have a bye this week. Jacksonville-Baltimore, this game was totally, I thought Baltimore would run through the number against Jacksonville, but turnovers cost them the game. Again, they didn't make the proper strategy decisions. They haven't been making them all year long. They have had a tough schedule, however. They're injured, so they're not taking care of themselves well. And again, injury is more a reflection of being less talented than your opponent, because you're playing a violent, hard-hitting contact sport. So again, injuries are never an excuse. The other thing I without saying too much, is I told Coach Tressman a definitive strategy to use for Joe Flacco this season. He did not use it, and Joe Flacco was really underproducing. Again, it's not just him, and even if he throws the two interceptions, which he did, they're team interceptions. They're never just attributable to, the one player, especially the quarterback. But there you go. I mean, the Ravens, there's a game that should have been reversed right there by NFL ESPN, and that's probably their season for sure. Minnesota and Oakland, we like Minnesota. Again, as I projected, they're a wild card team. If not, they're definitely the top three teams in the NFC. and that conference championship will be between Green Bay, Arizona, and Minnesota. I had projected Arizona and Green Bay. I wouldn't be surprised if it's Arizona and Minnesota now. But again, the media who said it during the Hall of Fame game, a little bit on Minnesota, but as soon as I saw how Minnesota was performing after the first 3 games when we made our season-long assessment, definitely halfway through the season, they're as good as any team in the NFL. They haven't played quite the quality schedule yet, and again, I'm not a big Teddy Bridgewater fan, and I can tell they're underproducing at quarterback. If they had a Russell Wilson at quarterback, they could be Seattle, Minnesota. I mean, Coach Zimmer there has really turned around the Minnesota defense, but again, they still have to play some better teams. But again, kudos to them. We projected the Chiefs would upset the Broncos. They did. Peyton Manning is as we projected at the beginning of the year, is probably near the, if not this last, the end of his career. Denver is doing better because of their head coach, but again, that was an upset, quote-unquote upset we predicted. Thought New England would do much better against the Giants. New England is weakening also. You can see that, and they lost their running back, and then now they've lost Edelman. And if they can only beat the Giants by a little bit like that, even though they won because they did have a turnover or 2 more than the Giants, that shows you New England's weakening and is primed for an upset because the Giants are a very weak team. And I will give some credit to the Giants in one sense, which is something that we've taught 10 years ago, even more than that. The Giants, apparently on defense, the Giants are have a huge plus turnover ratio. And I guess now everybody knows that they tackle in a very definitive way in their defense with trying to strip the ball and create turnovers. And when you're a really bad team like the Giants, the only chance every team should do it anyway, but when you're a really poor team, you really need to create turnovers on defense. And if another team scores 60 points because you're tackling the ball, let them. In the long run, you're going to be more productive. And the Giants have a real plus turnover ratio, but again, they're a really, really low-rated team. If it weren't for the turnovers, they'd probably have only 1 or 2 wins. But now teams are finally, the Giants should have been doing this for 10 or 15 years when I told them. When I actually went to the Giants training camp and had one of my guys working for me, with me, took a picture with Coach Coughlin, and his name's Anthony. So, I mean, just amazing how I saw this 15 years ago with these Giants when they, and even especially around the time they drafted Eli Manning. But, who listens? I'm going to go quickly here because I don't want to be short on time. So Arizona, Seattle, we liked that game. We thought Arizona could upset or win as the better team, and they showed that. Never thought Houston could keep up with Cincinnati. I think a lot of people were surprised by that game, as was I. And Cincinnati, again, we had said they're not as strong as people think. They've had a very weak schedule, and that's shown this week. Not a very weak schedule, but a weak schedule. So let's get into Week 11. I'm going to cover, within the last 7 minutes here, the games from an ESP, Nevada, and fantasy perspective, all inclusively, okay? For the last 7 minutes, we'll knock these out quickly. Tennessee's at Jacksonville in a close game. I actually like Tennessee a little bit. Media's beginning to talk about Jacksonville. That's a negative. Tennessee didn't play as bad as the score indicated last week against Carolina. It's still a close game. Jacksonville habitually does not make aggressive decisions, so if they ever fall behind to Tennessee, they're not going to do what it takes to catch up in that game. So, that's kind of a toss-up game, and I don't even think they should have a team in Jacksonville, to be honest with you. I think they should be in a different city, and I don't want to get more into that. Carolina's playing Washington. Again, I think Carolina still is a bit overrated, playing weak division. I wouldn't be surprised since this is the first game on the listing, like last week Detroit was the first game on the listing against Green Bay. Detroit upset. I wouldn't be surprised if Washington upset. Washington, as noted, needs to make aggressive strategy decisions. They do not. They need to know that they are at least a touchdown power spread underdog in Carolina. Carolina doesn't get a huge home field, but being undefeated, you're going to get more of a home field advantage, which is the biased refereeing calls. And again, Coach Gruden, as much as I like him, does not make really doesn't realize when he's a big underdog and really makes too many, bland basic strategy decisions. Bland, yes, was the word I used there. Detroit's playing Oakland. I wouldn't be surprised to see Detroit win again. I know a lot of people are already investing in Oakland. When they do that, you want to lean toward the other side. That's more of a Nevada perspective. From the fantasy side, surely that game probably will be high scoring. We liked Golden Tate last week. He had a good game. But again, I wouldn't play any Oakland players because too many people are playing them already. I can tell you that right now. Dallas is playing Miami. Tony Romo's back. Loved Tony Romo. Loved him when nobody else liked him. You can see how valuable he is to their team. But I think Miami is going to be is a better team. They showed that against Philadelphia. Miami being in AFC East versus the NFC East. And I think actually Miami at home will be a tough homecoming for a tough welcoming back for Tony Romo. Atlanta, again, shouldn't be giving points to anybody. I don't care if Andrew Luck is the quarterback or not, and he's not this week for Indianapolis. They could still win Atlanta, but they're, again, an overrated team, and they've shown that. We've been very accurate about that. If I'm Indy, I'm keeping that in mind. Surely Atlanta definitely needs to get home calls if you're in Atlanta and you're the referees there. St. Louis is playing Baltimore. God bless. Some of these teams you're going to start seeing when they're basically mathematically eliminated. They're going to lose their spirit, their focus, their motivation. Typically the bad teams, of low character fold quicker. Usually a bad record is often indicated of less or lower character. I don't think Baltimore is one of those teams. I know they're a very Christian team for the most part. God bless them. Again, my fault for not talking to Mr. Bisciotti, the owner, instead of everybody else I talked to who basically rejected NFL ESP. And spiritually, you cannot benefit if I am coming to you speaking on behalf of God and telling you God wants to help you and you reject him. Okay, you're not going to have a good record, and that was predicted at the beginning of the year. Even though Baltimore is a much higher rated team than their record is showing, and they're underperforming, and that's God bless the travesty as far as I'm concerned. But I think again I think Keenan will be an upgrade from Foles, actually, or at least equal to Foles, and maybe the change will help them. Houston ended up, as we said, winning here. I can't see them winning 2 in a row. I don't think they're a very good team. And the Jets, who we tried to work with, we know we could be helping the Jets. I don't know what the power spread is on this game. Actually, I haven't totally calculated it, but I would see the Jets winning. Green Bay, Minnesota, this would be a really good game. A lot of people are thinking Green Bay, but I can definitely see Green Bay losing 4 in a row. Again, they're injured. They're going to come back on by the end of the year. That's typically how you see these teams. You can break the season into 3 sections. The first 5, middle 5, and last 5 games. Kind of discount the last game, the 16th game. But typically, if you perform well in the first 5 games, you have a good 1-loss record. You'll have a good 1-loss record in the last 5. And then teams, who had bad 0-5 or low 1-loss records to start perform well in the middle, and that's what you're seeing. That's why you're seeing so many quote-unquote upsets. Tampa Bay's playing Philly. Again, these are 2 bad teams. I would lean toward Philly because of their defense, especially if Bradford is out. Denver's playing Chicago. I think you're going to see Denver perform better on offense, believe it or not, without Peyton Manning. And I think they're going to perform well in Chicago this week. If I was Chicago, and I know Coach Fox, I've followed him for many years. He doesn't make very aggressive basic strategy decisions. I don't know if he's going to get home field in Chicago, but he should. Cincinnati's playing Arizona, and definitely the best game of the week. The 2 best teams. I actually think Cincinnati can rebound, even though, like I said, I think Arizona in the long run is the better team, and Arizona at home. But NFL players, coaches, the whole staff, I mean, when they get embarrassed on a Monday night or they lose, motivation is a huge thing, and the word we always use is want. The team that really wants to win is the team that will win. Talent, takes a back seat to desire, and in this case, I think Cincinnati is going to want to win a heck of a lot more than Arizona. Seattle should beat San Francisco. San Francisco, again, we rated Gabbert low. He did come in, perform well in his first game for the Niners, but they're going to have to make tremendous basic strategy, aggressive decisions. They only probably have about, a 5% chance of winning that game as it is, and I know Coach Tomasulo doesn't realize that. I think Coach Carroll does, and he'll stay, close to the vest in their strategy decisions and win that one. Kansas City's playing San Diego. You've heard me talk a lot about both these teams. This, again, should be a close game. These two teams are actually decent teams. If San Diego would be more productive, which they're not. Kansas City is actually the better team, but on a night game in San Diego, televised game, I think San Diego will get the home calls in what should be a really close game. And then lastly, Buffalo and New England. I think you can see Buffalo upsetting, even though they're definitely in the long term not a better team than New England. But I think they might actually upset New England on this game on a Monday night. New England's been weakening. It's showing in their power spread numbers, and I think you're going to continue to see that because, when you're undefeated, you have a target on your back. And again, New England hasn't really played, any really quality opponents. But again, how can they if you're the best team? So you can't blame the other, them for beating every team that they're better than. But again, I think the power rating is a little off there. So anyway, that's it. Already the time's flown by. Listen, God bless everybody. Thank you for listening. I'm Mark Anthony DeBello. You've been listening to NFL Moneyball, brought to you by NFLESP.com, found on the web at NFL-ESP. Thank you, and God bless.